this first video, I'm going to be speaking about Eternally Dying, released back in 1998. Eternally Dying was a very important record for us, not only because it was our first, but also because it put the name of the band in Latin America. It gave us a very nice route to begin the career of the band. Media people say that Eternally Dying was the first complete LP of melodic black death metal in Latin America. Another thing that this album introduced was the combination of Viking and Gaucho folk, what I would call Gaucho Viking folk, which is something very unique, never done before. This is a record that lasts less than an hour. I think it's about 53 minutes, and it includes 11 tracks. They were recorded in a studio named Studios Record in Montevideo, Uruguay. We ended up remixing it in Santiago de Chile with an engineer that worked with bands such as Inner Sanctum and Criminal back in the day. After we finished mixing Eternally Dying in Montevideo, it didn't sound in the way that we wanted. We ended up going to Chile, and Corral did a great job remixing the record. After the album was mixed, we ended up going to Buenos Aires, Argentina. An engineer that was recommended to me by Claudio Strampf, the drummer of Hermetica and Malone back in the day, and he ended up mastering this record. This album has very unique features. It was written during a very long period. It started being written back in the early 90s when I was a kid and I was studying keyboards in my hometown, Tacuarembó, with Victor Amaral. Back in the day, I recorded like 5 cassettes with a lot of keyboard music. I decided to include the last track of this album, Milonga. The other 10 tracks were written during a very long period, between 1995 and 1997. 3 of these tracks, at least, including Irony, March to Eternity, and maybe some parts of Infamy, were written when we were rehearsing with the first lineup, Lopez, Mendes, Magallanes, and myself. Actually, before this lineup was formed, I had a band in 1994, which we rehearsed for about 6 months or so, which was also with Martin Mendes on bass and Gonzalo Nunez on drums. And we probably wrote about 5 thrash metal songs. Then we dissolved this band with the lineup that ended up becoming the first lineup of Requiem Aeternam, and some of these riffs transitioned into some of these tracks for Eternally Dying. There was not much originality on these thrash metal songs, but some of the riffs survived. Infamy is the one that opens up the album. Classic song for Requiem Aeternam today. It was the first track that we did a video for, which ended up being aired in MTV Latin America and MTV Brazil. And it was a very important promotion during that time for us, because MTV back in the day was the main source for rock and metal music. Mixture of melodic death metal, thrash metal, with some combination with Rio de la Plata folk, basically. I wrote this song with Pablo Magallanes. He wrote the last riff of this song, the one that is right after the drum fill at the very end, and I made some arrangement for that. The rest of the parts were written by myself. Maybe some version of this track we rehearsed with the first lineup back in 1995. But we definitely completed this song in 1996 because we did a demo with 3 tracks that I ended up producing myself, and it was the first time that we listened Requiem Aeternam with the second lineup as a trio. After Pablo Magallanes also left for Sweden, following the departure of Martin Lopez and Martin Mendez. They went to Sweden probably early 96, and Magallanes ended up going there later that year.
I will die again. I don't know, my friend, where is my life?
The second track is My Misery, track that I wrote on my own. It was probably one of the latest tracks to write, and it's a combination of some thrash metal parts with some more alternative rock metal vibes in there. Both the lyrics of Infamy and My Misery are quite personal. Especially My Misery is based on some of my own personal experiences. Then the third track is Nature and Principle, which is a very black death metal track, basically inspired by the music I was listening to at that time. Martin Lopez gave me a lot of melodic death metal and black death metal coming from Sweden and Norway and Finland, and I wrote this track following that school of music. The lyrics, however, are all the way into philosophy. As a matter of fact, I quote two philosophers on that lyric. One of the key tracks to bring philosophy into the picture. Because I remember that after Mendes and Lopez left for Sweden, I was by myself and I had to put the band together from scratch. And it was during that time, I was probably 20, 21, that I started reading a lot of philosophy. After reading for a couple of years, I decided to include philosophy and some theology too into Requiem Aeternam lyrics. I wrote all of these lyrics in Spanish, and then they were translated by my sister into English. The fourth track is Come Back. Also, like My Misery, very personal type of lyrics. The music was based on the things I was listening when I was starting listening to rock and metal music. Ballads by rock and metal bands. And I believe that Come Back is that ballad type of song. Tries to combine ballad with some type of folk. I like a lot the end of this track, which is basically an acoustic part. It also has a video that we did. I remember that the video for Infamy we did in El Canal 4 in Montevideo, and the video for this track we did it in El Canal 5 in Montevideo. When it comes to Irony, which is the fifth track of this record, I wrote this track with Pablo Magallanes, both the music and the lyrics, and this was one of the tracks that we did with the first lineup, and we did play this track in a different version though. On the first show of the band in the house of Martin Lopez in front of 25 people in there, we only showed that we played with our faces painted like a black metal band, and it was the only show ever in the history of the band that I played keyboards and guitars, and I was transitioning sometimes from the guitar to the keyboard. And this track, Irony, we played it with a different lyric. It's a very melodic track, also based on Swedish death metal bands, more into melodic death metal than black death metal. One of the things I like about this track, that is a very unique musical structure. What Pablo Magallanes did, he brought me different riffs, and what I did was to put them together and to give them musical structure. What I like of this song is that in a way I utilize subconsciously a very philosophical way to write this track, because even though it's not too original, because it was inspired by a lot of Swedish bands, the musical structure is very original, very unique, because it always kind of transitioning into something new, which is basically what I did when I wrote, for example, Logos, the track I like the most from Philosopher LP, the following album. basically always flowing, like changing into something new, never repeating itself. I was looking for a new style in metal music, and we ended up calling ourselves dialectical metal, because dialecticism, which was a philosophical school started by Heraclitus in Greece, had a big impact on me. Heraclitus was one of the main figures in philosophy in my early days reading philosophy. As a matter of fact, the nickname of Heraclitus was the Obscure, because his lyrics, his work is very dark, very difficult to understand. Only fragments of his work survived to this day. He had an impact on me during the time I was writing the music and the lyrics for Eternally Dying, and irony got a little bit of that influence, because the way that irony was written was very dialectical. Even though the melodies are highly inspired by Swedish death metal. Then we have Eternally Dying, which is the song that names the record. It is a very poetic track. This was inspired a little bit by when I was part of Inner Sanctum, which was a prior Uruguayan death and doom metal band. They have this very good record named Frozen Souls, and that kind of inspired me because I was playing with them for a couple of years, and they have all these doom-based songs, and I felt that I wanted to have a doom type of track on this record. Because of my days with Inner Sanctum in 1996 and 1997, it created a little bit of this liking for doom metal music. And I believe that Eternally Dying is not a ballad, it's more like a doom metal track combined with classical, and it's very powerful, especially to play live. First Dream is a track kind of following the school of Nature and Principle, but it has a more classical, less black metal, but more like melodic death metal vibe to it. It has a kind of similar musical structure. It's very fast and it's always changing, and the lyrics are based on a book I read by Sigmund Freud. When I read that book, he was speaking about this original dream. I wrote the lyrics for this track, thinking in a dreamlike environment and kind of using psychology, especially psychoanalysis. I remember that when we presented the album in La Factoría in Montevideo back in 1998, we opened up with this track. Lost in the Unknown is a track very melodic and more heavy metal. It's also kind of inspired by Nordic type of music. It also has this melodic and even Arabic vibe in some of the parts. It is a very unique track for the album, and it's very unique in the discography of the band because nothing like it was written after. And it has these nice keyboard arrangements. The lyrics, again, it's very personal, kind of a mixture of philosophy and psychology. Then March to Eternity is one of the tracks that we did play with the first lineup, and we did play this track when kind of a different version of what it became after, when we did the first show for the band back in 1995. We did play this track with a different lyric and a different structure. I remember that Lopez liked a lot the beginning of this track, and he gave me ideas on the rhythmical part, and then I changed certain things. I remember when I was in Inner Sanctum, I wrote some music for Inner Sanctum, which in the end the band became dissolved because the drummer emigrated to Europe. Music that we did play live, but it was never actually recorded. With Inner Sanctum, we recorded 3 tracks that were never released. I was playing bass and doing vocals, but we also wrote more music. And some of the riffs of this song, March to Eternity, were brought in from the things I wrote for Inner Sanctum. When it comes to the lyrics of March to Eternity, it's more mystical. I like a lot the solo, even though I recorded it very fast. It's a very unique solo that I did. It has a lot of tapping. It was one of the tracks I enjoyed a lot when I was playing this track live. It has a very Swedish death metal vibe to it. That was basically what Martin Lopez wanted me to write.
In my mind, in my brain, in my mind.
The Form Spirit was written by me, Magallanes, and Aguilar. Aguilar wrote the beginning, the bass part, and I added some keywords in there. And Magallanes has some melodies, especially on the chorus of the song. I liked a lot those little melodies that he created, and I brought them in and made them part of the track. They became part of the composition. This is probably the most black metal song in the album, because the lyrics are very dark. It's like inspired on more like a theology and mysticism and even occultism on this particular track. But the music is probably the most black metal track on the album. I believe that the Form Spirit could be called a black metal song. It's probably the only one because, for example, Nature and Principle is more like black death metal. Even you can say that it's black death thrash metal track. The Form Spirit is pretty much a black metal track, even though it has a part in the middle with violin, cello, and viola in addition to piano in there. It's probably the only kind of quote-unquote pure black metal track in the album, because it has very dark lyrics and a very black metal guitar style and drumming style. It's very fast. I like a lot this track. I like to play it live, even though we haven't played it in a long time. It's one of the tracks of Eternally Dying that I like to play live again. Then Milonga is just an acoustic track with 2 guitars. It's a combination of the keyboard parts I wrote when I was a kid, back in 1990. I was 15 years old. And then they became guitar parts that I ended up rehearsing with Eduardo Larbanois in his apartment in Montevideo. I asked him to bring in some kind of a Citarrosa vibe into the track. And because originally this track, the idea was to call it Milonga para Citarrosa. The rhythmical part of this track, the only instrumental track of this record, is not a milonga. Mostly like a rhythmical thing that I did, but what it is a milonga is the way that the arrangements are made. Eduardo did a solo, a very nice solo in there. The chords that I used, you could say that it was kind of milongish, but it's not a milonga. It's a kind of derivation of a classical milonga. But I like a lot to transition into kind of a acoustic black metal in the end. I remember that I was rehearsing with Inner Sanctum, this death doom metal Uruguayan band that I was part of for about a couple of years, from 1996 to 1997 basically. I was rehearsing with them at Álvaro Garcia's rehearsing place in Montevideo, and this guy came in out of nowhere with the logo saying Requiem. It didn't have the Aeternam, only Requiem. And then I learned that he also designed the logo for Inner Sanctum. And then when we had the album ready, the brother of this guy, he was a designer, and he ended up completing the logo. Also came with the idea of the cover of the record. The album ended up being released by a company I put together with two partners in Uruguay, and ended up being distributed by Furious Record, this Argentinian label. They did a great job promoting and selling this album. Then we ended up doing a lot of distributions with different companies in Latin America. Basically, we focused a lot on Latin America. The album ended up doing very well, and we did a lot of shows in the Mercosur area, mostly in Uruguay, Argentina, Brazil, and Paraguay, from 1998 until 2001, because in May of 2002 I emigrated to the United States. So the last show that we did was, I think, December of 2001 in Montevideo.